Having performed a complicated operation on a homeless man, the doctor reluctantly went to the meeting about her dismissal. And as soon as the patient regained consciousness, Kathy Johnson had been working at the private clinic for a while and was accustomed to the fact that the head of the surgical department was Carl Kelly. He was the one who decided who would have surgery and when, as well as allocating medications from the Social Welfare Fund. Therefore, when Kathy, at her own risk, performed surgery on a homeless man who had been brought in with a penetrating abdominal wound during a night shift, she knew she was taking a significant risk. On the other hand, Kathy believed that a doctor should help anyone in need, regardless of whether they were a bum or a millionaire. Unfortunately, the result was a medical review called at the initiative of Carl, who had the loudly spoken nickname Serpent among the staff. The conference room was filled with an oppressive silence. The air was thick with the tension emanating from the massive oak table where the doctors were seated. Carl was the center of attention, his face darker than a storm cloud. "Dear colleagues," he began, "let's speak frankly about the situation. Kathy has committed a gross violation of ethics and professional standards by performing surgery on a homeless man without my knowledge and approval from the management." The room stirred. Some exchanged glances, their eyes showing sympathy for Kathy, but no one dared to speak up. "Kathy," Carl continued, "don't you understand that we are not a charity organization here? We provide high-quality medical care for a fee. Helping the homeless is not part of our mandate." "But Carl," Kathy said anxiously, her eyes glistening with tears, "he had a severe injury, a penetrating wound, internal bleeding. I couldn't just stand by and watch him die." At that moment, she discreetly pulled out of her purse a peculiar object made of cheap tin in the shape of a small flower. She considered it her talisman and had not parted with it since she was 10 years old. "We shouldn't take responsibility for the homeless," Carl replied firmly. "We can't afford to divert our attention from our primary tasks and our paying patients. The homeless should go to the city hospital. There, they will receive help through the state mandatory insurance program." "Allow me, Carl," interjected Martha Myers, head of the therapeutic department. "We are called to help everyone regardless of their status. We can't just let someone die because they don't have a home." "Martha," Carl cut her off. "Let's not sidetrack the conversation. We are discussing a breach of protocol, not professional behavior. Kathy did not get my approval for the surgery, which is a direct violation of the regulations." "But she saved his life," whispered Michelle Owen, the surgeon who had assisted Kathy with the homeless man. "He would have died if we hadn't intervened." "Saved," Carl said with a sarcastic smile. "Do you think saving the life of a homeless person is a doctor's most important task? Oh, don't make me laugh. We don't even know his name. Who is he? What if he committed a crime and became a victim of accomplices? And who will pay for the period while he's in a coma?" An awkward silence fell over the room. The doctors looked around at each other, seeking support in their colleagues' eyes, but no one else dared to speak. Everyone understood that Carl was a principled man and would not back down from his decision. "I've said all I need to," declared Carl. "Kathy is being dismissed from her position." Carl, the chief physician, intervened. "Maybe we shouldn't rush into this. Kathy is a skilled surgeon who performed the operation excellently. Perhaps we should give her a second chance." "Jason Black," Carl replied with a soft but firm tone, "I do not wish to discuss this further. I have made my decision." "Very well," the chief physician conceded, understanding that arguing was futile. "But we should take this lesson to heart and possibly reconsider our policy regarding the homeless. Perhaps we should introduce a medical assistance program for the underprivileged?" But Carl ignored the chief physician's comment. The fact was that a month ago, he had held the position of chief physician at the clinic and had been dismissed more due to a misunderstanding than for any valid reason. The mood in the conference room was somber. The doctors exchanged glances, understanding that cruelty and insensitivity would prevail in this situation. The doctor who had risked saving a human life would be fired, while Carl would remain the head of the department with his reputation intact. After the meeting, Kathy went into the chief physician's office. He sat at his desk, looking at her from under his brows. "Kathy," he said with an icy tone, "I've made my decision. You're dismissed." "But Carl," she sobbed. "I don't want to leave. I love my job and want to save lives." "I understand," he replied. "But you broke the rule. You had no right to make that decision." "He was dying," Kathy exclaimed. "I couldn't just watch him." "You should have called me," Carl countered. "I would have told you what to do." "And what would you have said?" Kathy asked defiantly. "Would you have left that poor man to his fate?" Carl was silent. He couldn't say it out loud, but he knew that, most likely, he would have sent the homeless man to the city hospital where he would receive the necessary care. But the likelihood of the vagrant making it there was very low. "Kathy, I understand this is a tough blow, but you have to realize that I'm doing this not out of malice, but to protect the clinic's reputation and shield our doctors from responsibility for actions that fall outside our regulations. It's not fair. The patient was in critical condition, and I provided the necessary help. And now I'm being fired, and no one will know the truth," Kathy cried, trembling with emotion. The department head just shook his head and gestured toward the door. In this clinic, he was the gray cardinal and often took on too much, making decisions bypassing the newly appointed chief physician. Kathy left the office and trudged toward the exit, clutching a thin envelope containing her dismissal notice. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smudging her mascara, but she didn't notice. The words "fired, fired, fired" kept echoing in her mind. The hallway was silent, as if all the doctors were holding their breath, watching her. Kathy received sympathetic glances from her colleagues, but they only intensified her sense of injustice. She wanted to scream, to punch the walls, but she just walked silently toward the exit, feeling the emptiness inside grow, consuming her. It was already dark outside. The cold evening air hit her face, making her shiver. Kathy pulled out her phone to call a taxi, but seeing missed calls from her neighbor, Angela Allen, she decided against it. She walked down the street, ignoring passers-by, crying like a child, unable to comprehend how such a thing could happen. Recently, her life had become less vibrant, resembling a black and white film with no place for rainbows and bright colors. Her thoughts swirled with the notion of wasted years and how her dream of a great and bright future had become as fragile as a soap bubble. She sank into memories. It all started in childhood when Kathy first realized she wanted to be a doctor. Her mother, a simple teacher, never understood this passion. "Doctors aren't just a profession, they're a calling," Julie Johnson used to say. "You should think about your career, about what will bring you joy in life." Oh, if only Kathy could have known then that just a few months after that lighthearted conversation, her parents would be gone. She continued walking down the street, oblivious to the pedestrians and the headlights of passing cars. Crossing to the opposite side of the street, she once again delved into her memories, a world of darkness and emptiness. How old was she? 10? 10 years old when her familiar world shattered, like an earthquake shaking her universe. She remembered it like a terrible dream. The morning, the drizzling rain, and her neighbor Jessica Bell's plea not to go, saying she'd had a bad dream, especially since it was Friday night. But Michael Martin simply brushed it off. "Come on, it's not like I'm new to driving." The car skidded on the slick asphalt. Kathy was in the back seat, her nose buried in a teddy bear. It seemed to her that everything was happening very slowly, as if some merciless director had set everything to the slowest speed. She heard the clanging of metal, the cracking of glass, her mother's screams, but she felt no pain. Only later, when she was pulled from the car, did she see the blood on the asphalt, on her hands, on her mother's face. Kathy cried, but relief did not come. She remembered her Uncle Brian Hall, her mother's brother, picking her up, holding her tightly as if he wanted to protect her from everything in the world. She remembered the scent of his cologne, which was as warm and comforting as his embrace. "Come to me, Kathy, come to Aunt Angela," he whispered, and Kathy felt his hand involuntarily tightening as if he were trying to hold her back from something terrible that awaited ahead. She remembered being taken by ambulance to the hospital and placed in a bright room with a soft couch. A little later, a woman in a white coat came to the orphan girl and gave her an injection. Kathy fell asleep, not knowing what would happen next. She woke up in a quiet room with long white curtains that blocked out the light. Angela was standing nearby, looking at her with sad, tearful eyes. "Kathy, my dear, you have to be strong," she said. Kathy realized that now she was completely alone. Her mom and dad were gone. They couldn't be brought back by any treasures in the world. She clearly remembered the funeral, standing by the closed coffins, saying goodbye to her parents. At that moment, it seemed to her that mom and dad were just sleeping and would soon wake up, then smile at her, but they did not wake up. Kathy remembered the heavy clumps of earth being thrown onto the grave, as if burying them into oblivion. The girl cried, and the tears brought her no comfort. "Don't cry, Kathy. You have to accept this. Now mom and dad live in your heart, in your memories," Angela comforted her, holding her niece and stroking her head. "But I want to see them, I want to hear them, and have them close by," Kathy screamed in despair. Angela only hugged her tighter, as if to protect her from the pain. Of course, Kathy understood that Angela was right. She would indeed have to come to terms with the fact that her parents could never be brought back. But she could not do it, could not simply forget them. Since then, at least once a week, Kathy visited the cemetery, where she would stand by their graves and tell her mom and dad about her life, dreams, and childhood fears. During these moments, she felt that they could hear her, that they were with her. "Mom, Dad, I want to become a doctor. I want to help people like you helped me," she would whisper. Sometimes it seemed to her that her parents were responding. "We're proud of you, Kathy. You can do anything." Emerging from the depths of her memories, Kathy looked around. Her home was just a few meters away, but she wasn't in a hurry. No one was waiting for her there anyway, except for the fish in the aquarium, the red-eared turtle in the terrarium, and Milo, the cat she had rescued from the street 3 years ago. At that moment, she recalled an incident from her childhood that had occurred during one of her cemetery visits. Kathy, small and fragile, with pitch-black hair braided into 2 pigtails, stood by the grave, clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. She tried not to cry, but tears traitorously rolled down her cheeks, leaving wet trails on her chubby face. "Mom, Dad, I miss you," she whispered, looking at the gravestones adorned with chrysanthemums and carnations. "I have so much to tell you. I have new friends at school. We go to an art club together. And I draw you. You know, so that you are always with me." After that, Kathy took out a folded drawing from her pocket. It depicted her parents, her mom with a gentle smile and her dad, who always wore neatly trimmed mustaches and held her hand. "I wish you'd come back soon," Kathy continued, her voice trembling with barely suppressed sobs. "I won't eat chocolate anymore, and I'll always listen to Angela." With that, she leaned against the cold stone with the engraved names, closed her eyes, and imagined her parents happy and smiling. "You're so grown up and still believed in fairy tales," a boyish voice suddenly rang out. She flinched and opened her eyes. In front of her stood a boy of about 10, dressed in a torn, dirty jacket and similarly patched pants. His tangled hair poked out from beneath a ragged cap and stood up in unruly tufts. "Who are you?" Kathy asked, not taking her eyes off the boy. "Douglas," he smiled, his white teeth sharply contrasting with his tanned face. "I come here often. My grandmother is buried here." "I didn't know." "I'm Kathy," the girl replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. "It's okay," Douglas waved it off. "I'm used to it." "What are you doing here?" Kathy asked, giving him an assessing look from head to toe. "Don't you live with anyone?" "No, I don't have a mom or a dad." The boy lowered his head, and Kathy saw a tear rolling down his cheek. "I live on the street with some friends." "Don't you want to go to a children's home?" Kathy asked. "It's supposed to be better there." "I haven't been there myself, but I've heard from other kids." "No, I don't want to," Douglas shook his head. "I take care of myself." At that moment, Douglas pulled out an old marker and several strange items, which looked like they were cut out of tin. Look, I made this flower, he said, holding up a small flower-shaped piece cut from a tin can. Wow, it's so beautiful, Kathy said, admiring the tin daisy. A smile spread across the girl's face. It's a gift, Douglas said. Thank you. Kathy took the flower and gently stroked it. I sometimes come here and tell my grandmother about my plans. I want to become a sailor and travel all the seas. I want to become a doctor, Kathy said. To save people and make them happy. Oh, that's an interesting dream, Douglas remarked, sounding quite grown up. I think you can do it. Thank you, Kathy said. And I believe you'll become a sailor and travel the world. I'll definitely tell you about my travels, the boy smiled. Good, Kathy replied, her eyes glistening with tears. Don't cry. Douglas put his hand on her shoulder. Everything will be okay. Kathy nodded and remembered how, when her parents were still alive, she used to play with the neighbor boy, Lewis Cole. They would play hide and seek in the garden, and Kathy often hid behind a large walnut tree. Do you like playing hide and seek? She asked as they headed out of the cemetery. Of course, I do. What do you mean? Douglas smiled. Do you want to play? We can do it out on the wasteland. Let's do it, though I might not find you, Kathy smiled. Give it a try, Douglas winked. Kathy nodded, and once they reached the wasteland next to the wooded area, she began to look around. She saw the same old oaks, tall pines, and bare birch branches. Hide, she said confidently. All right, Douglas whispered and disappeared between the tree trunks. Kathy waited for the right amount of time and started searching for him, but it was all in vain. The boy seemed to have vanished into thin air. Douglas, where are you? She shouted, but there was no answer. Eventually, she made her way to the bus stop and wearily sat on a bench. He's already gone, said an unfamiliar old woman who was sitting on the bench feeding bread to pigeons. Where did he go? Kathy asked anxiously. How should I know? The old woman replied. Maybe he ran off to the city, maybe not. Children do what they want. I really want to find him, Kathy said, tears welling up in her eyes. You'll find him, you will, the stranger reassured her. Don't be sad, let me see your hand. I'll take a look and see what's what. Kathy hesitantly extended her hand to the elderly woman. Immediately, the old woman began to carefully study her palm, her wrinkled fingers gliding over the delicate skin as if trying to read the secrets hidden deep inside. I see many trials awaiting you, the old woman said. Her voice grew husky and quiet, like the rustling of autumn leaves. But don't be afraid, you're strong and you'll manage. There's a flame burning inside you that doesn't extinguish even in the darkest times. Kathy nodded, desperately trying to understand what the woman meant. She felt that life was indeed becoming a real challenge. You will face many hardships, the fortune teller continued. But don't lose hope. You are not alone. The old woman moved closer, almost touching Kathy, and whispered, You will meet Douglas again. He will be like a protector to you, like a brother, like a friend, helping you overcome all obstacles. But it's not yet time to explain everything. Everything will come in its own time. Kathy looked at the old woman, trying to decipher her prediction. At that moment, she felt a degree of trust in her, and that's why she wasn't frightened by the prophecy. So I will find him? Kathy asked. Yes, dear, you will find him, the elderly fortune teller replied. And don't forget, a great and happy life awaits you. Pelagia never makes mistakes. You will be able to achieve everything you desire. Just wait a little while. At that moment, a bus appeared around the corner. With a comical sputter of its engine, it rolled down the road, carefully avoiding potholes and bumps. Kathy nodded gratefully and, clutching the flower made from a tin can, hurried to the arriving bus. Although her heart felt empty, Kathy now knew for certain that she would eventually meet Douglas. Years passed, but that meeting never occurred. Kathy made her choice, driven by her childhood dream of saving lives, treating the sick, and bringing joy and hope to their hearts. She threw herself into her studies at medical university with great dedication, participating in scientific circles and immersing herself fully in the world of medicine. Her passion did not go unnoticed. At the end of her studies, she was offered a position at a prestigious clinic where she could apply her knowledge in practice. Kathy was on cloud nine. It felt like her dream had come true. She quickly gained the respect of her colleagues in the clinic. She was known as a talented and promising doctor. However, from the very beginning of her work, she had to face problems that left her perplexed. The clinic was private, and its main goal was profit, which meant that patients were often treated under voluntary health insurance programs, limiting doctors' choices in treatment methods. A strict system of restrictions was in place. Doctors could not make independent decisions about surgeries or medications. Every step of the doctors and surgical nurses had to be approved by the head of the department, Carl, a man who was not so much evil as he was unprincipled. He was obsessed with his career and the clinic's reputation, willing to sacrifice everything for them. Furthermore, Serpent was intolerant of any contradictions and did not allow anyone else to know better how to manage treatment. From the beginning of her work, Kathy encountered more than just this case. Patients came from other cities, hoping for miracles and the professionalism of doctors. She saw Carl refuse them help, citing lack of health insurance or insufficient funds. It was extremely painful and unfair, but Kathy felt powerless. She was just a young doctor, and he was a high-ranking official. Of course, she understood that there were many flaws in the clinic, but at the same time, Kathy didn't want to resign herself to the system. She dreamed of making the world better, helping people not just recover from illnesses, but also to feel happy and loved. She waited eagerly for her chance to demonstrate her professionalism, to prove that she deserved to work at this clinic. And there it was, she demonstrated, as they say. She demonstrated so much that now it felt nauseating. Finally, she reached the high-rise building where her apartment was located. The key turned in the lock with a heavy creak, as if protesting the intrusion. Kathy pulled the door open. Cool air seeped into the apartment, bringing with it the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. She felt a strange suffocation in her chest, as if she were being squeezed by the vice of hopelessness. The dim light from the street lamp pierced through the thin curtains on the window. Kathy cautiously stepped over the threshold and closed the door behind her. The apartment was silent, punctuated only by the soft ticking of the wall clock and the gentle purring of Milo, her cat, sleeping on the couch by the window. Kathy removed her coat and hung it on the hook in the entryway. She felt completely out of sorts. Everything merged into a misty blur, where time lost its meaning. She walked into the living room and stopped by the window. Outside, the city was darkening, shrouded in dense autumn twilight. Streetlights illuminated the wet asphalt roads, on which rare cars sped by. Kathy noticed a woman in a dark blue coat waiting at the nearest trolleybus stop. She stood with her head bowed, as if trying to shield herself from the cold and the world. Kathy recalled how her life had once been different. How she and her future husband, Sean, would stroll through these streets on long evenings, holding hands and laughing at silly things. How they dreamed of their own family, of a large and bright house where the laughter of children would always echo. But everything changed, as if an invisible hand had drawn a black line under her life, leaving behind emptiness and pain. 2 months ago, Sean Hill left her. He simply packed his things and didn't say a word. She would forever remember his cold gaze, devoid of any love or regret. He called it an unsuccessful experiment that was pointless. Kathy cried alone at night, clinging to every little detail, every memory of him. She couldn't understand how someone could just leave her, especially when they had been so happy together. Kathy recalled how they had met. It was at some noisy student event where everyone was dressed in silly costumes, singing loudly, and awkwardly dancing to retro hits. Sean was dressed as a knight, with a ridiculous helmet that constantly slipped over his nose. Kathy, on the other hand, was in the guise of a stern nun, though instead of the usual black garb, she wore a bright purple dress made from some strange, shiny material that looked like foil. "Excuse me," Sean mumbled, slightly stumbling. "I still don't get who you are. Maybe a sorceress?" Kathy smirked. I'd love to be a sorceress, but unfortunately, I'm just a plain nun, she replied, adjusting her costume. Then why the dress? Sean asked, not quite sure and a little surprised, glancing at her bright outfit. Kathy shrugged. I don't know, she said. I thought it would make me stand out more. Sean laughed. You already stand out, he exclaimed, smoothly switching to a more familiar tone. Well, I didn't stop there, Kathy said with a smile. I'm also participating in a contest. A contest? Sean looked at her with interest. What kind of contest? Kathy asked. For the most original costume, Sean replied. Kathy glanced at his knightly helmet. I guess you're not participating? Me? Sean laughed. I definitely wouldn't make the cut. Why? Your costume looks great. Well, the helmet keeps falling off. Sean tried to adjust it, but it indeed slipped down over his eyes. See? Kathy laughed and looked at him with a touch of irony. Yeah, I see. Do you have any other talents? Me? Oh, I have plenty of talents. Like what? Kathy looked at him with interest. I'm really good at checkers, Sean said, pulling out a miniature board from his pocket. Look. He quickly made a few moves, carelessly shifting the tiny checkers on the board. Wow, Kathy exclaimed. You're a pro. Nah, I just play a lot. What else can you do? She asked. Anything else? Sean scratched his head. I'm also good at drawing. Will you show me? No, that's a secret. Maybe another time. Kathy smiled. All right. Another time it is. It just so happened that this was how their relationship began. Sean was a handsome, intelligent guy who attracted attention from many girls, but Kathy was charmed not by his looks, but by his kind heart and quick wit. They fell in love at first sight and soon became inseparable. Kathy smiled as she remembered how Sean would pick her up from school in his old car, how they would go to the movies or the theater together, and how he would prepare for exams while sitting next to her. Then the memory of their wedding day surfaced, perhaps the happiest day of her life. The bridal gown, a white silk corset adorned with pearls and a full tulle skirt, felt weightless, like a cloud. Her hair was decorated with fresh white orchids, and her usually bright, lively eyes were filled with tears, tears of happiness, of course. Angela stood beside her, holding her hand, trying to convey her confidence and calmness. Don't worry, Kathy. Everything will be all right. You deserve to be happy. And Sean is a real man. He will take care of you. At that moment, Brian approached them, dressed in a formal suit. He gently embraced Kathy. You look beautiful. Today, you seem to be the most beautiful bride in the world. Kathy blushed and smiled. She knew that, despite his usual skepticism, her uncle was genuinely happy for her. He had always treated her like his own daughter, supporting her in everything. After the death of her parents, he had become a true friend and pillar of support. Behind them, Sean stood waiting for the ceremony to begin. The groom was dressed in a classic black suit that perfectly complemented his slim figure. Sean's eyes shone with genuine love and tenderness. Kathy could feel in her heart that her chosen one was as nervous as she was. During the ceremony, their gazes met again. There were no doubts in their eyes, only tenderness and joy at the thought that their lives were now irrevocably intertwined. Sean, you may now place the ring on the bride's finger. Sean, not taking his eyes off Kathy, took the delicate gold ring with its subtle engraving and attempted to slide it onto her slender finger. But suddenly, the ring slipped from his hands, falling with an unpleasant clatter onto the tiled floor. The guests held their breath, staring at the ornament lying on the smooth surface. Hey, whispered Angela, clutching her heart. That's a bad omen. Kathy paled. She understood exactly what her aunt meant. Since childhood, she had been haunted by superstitions and omens, deeply rooted in her mind due to the tragic death of her parents. Kathy vividly remembered how Angela had become like a mother to her, raising her strictly but with tenderness. Thankfully, Sean didn't notice the change in his bride's expression. He knelt down, picked up the ring, and tried again to slip it on her finger. "Sorry, I'm just nervous. Everything okay?" Kathy looked at him, trying to smile, but it came out hesitant. It's a bad omen, Sean." "What omen?" asked the groom, genuinely confused. "When the ring falls on the floor before the wedding, it means something's wrong." "Come on, that's just nonsense," said Sean, taking her hand and finally slipping the ring on her finger. "Everything will be fine. I love you and want to spend my whole life with you." "I love you too, Sean," Kathy replied, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It wouldn't leave her. She knew superstitions were foolish, but she couldn't escape them. Her whole life had been steeped in a fear of the unknown, of what might happen at any moment. Nevertheless, the wedding celebration continued in a warm and joyful atmosphere. Guests laughed, sang, and danced, but Kathy couldn't fully immerse herself in the festivities. She sat quietly in a corner of the hall, thinking about the future. She loved Sean with all her heart, but at the same time, she feared for their relationship, feared for their life together. "Kathy, what's wrong?" Sean asked as he sat down next to her. "You don't seem like yourself." "Just a little tired," Kathy replied, forcing a faint smile. "Then take a rest," Sean suggested, taking her hand. "We'll wait for you." Kathy stood up and walked into a separate room, turned on the light, and approached the mirror. The reflection seemed foreign to her. Her eyes looked dull, and her cheeks were pale and sunken. Kathy gazed at her wedding dress, the white gown that was supposed to symbolize the beginning of a new, pure life. But to her, it felt like she was dressed in a funeral shroud. She hesitated for a moment, then returned to the hall, where the number of guests had dwindled significantly. Sean was waiting for her by the table, looking at her with concern. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," Kathy replied, trying to act natural. Sean took her hand, and they left the hall together. "Let's go. I'll take you away from all these people." They walked into the garden that surrounded the venue. It was dark but not gloomy. The moonlight illuminated the paths covered in crisp gravel. Kathy closed her eyes and took in the fresh evening air. "Sean," she said, "I'm afraid. I'm afraid of the future." "Don't be," he said, holding her hand tightly. "I'll always be by your side." He turned to her, and their lips met in a long, tender kiss. In that kiss, there was everything, her fears, her uncertainty, but also hope and the belief that together they could overcome any obstacles. "I won't let anyone take you from me," Sean whispered. Kathy opened her eyes and smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but she believed that she loved Sean more than life itself, and that meant everything would be okay. The honeymoon was planned for the next day. Sean had booked the plane tickets well in advance, deciding to spend a week by the sea. They had bought everything they needed: swimsuits, shorts, dresses, sunscreen, and hats. At the same time, Kathy had purchased a few things for Angela so she wouldn't feel guilty about leaving her behind. "Angela," Kathy said during dinner, "I bought you some new clothes." "Kathy, you didn't have to spend money on me," her aunt replied. "It's nothing," Kathy said. "I just want you to enjoy yourself while we're on our trip." "All right," Angela responded. "I'll miss you." "We'll be back soon," Kathy replied. "How could I ever forget about you? You're like a mother to me." At that moment, Angela heard the sadness in her niece's voice as she spoke those words and immediately understood that Kathy was still grieving the loss of her parents. No amount of love could replace them. "Kathy, don't be sad. Everything will be all right," Angela said gently. "I hope so," Kathy replied, smiling at her. The very next day, Kathy woke up to a sunbeam slipping through the curtains of their hotel room by the sea. She stretched and smiled to herself. She was happy. They had arrived the previous day, and everything had been like a fairy tale. Sean had reserved a table on a terrace overlooking the ocean. They dined surrounded by the scent of flowers and the fresh sea breeze. Sean was so in love, so attentive and tender, that Kathy felt like the luckiest woman in the world. "You're beautiful," he said, gazing at her with love. "So are you," Kathy replied, taking his hand. They spent the day on the beach. Kathy swam in the sea, sunbathed, and read a book, while Sean played beach volleyball and entertained her with his jokes. In the evening, they strolled through the streets of the town, buying souvenirs. Kathy was thrilled. Sean filmed her on his phone and showered her with kisses, wanting to capture every moment of their romantic getaway. "Kathy," he said as they sat in a cafe, "I'm so happy we got married." "And I'm happy too," Kathy replied, feeling that their love had grown even stronger. They were a perfect match. The newlyweds returned home after a week full of memories and joyful experiences. For nearly 3 years, everything was like a fairy tale: flowers, gifts, cozy celebrations on special dates. The only thing that troubled Kathy was their lack of children. The doctors diagnosed her with infertility. At first, every attempt to conceive ended in disappointment. Then came the tests, examinations, medications, treatments, and the anxious days of waiting for a miracle. But the miracle never happened. Sean was always by her side, never letting her lose hope. He told her that it didn't matter whether they had children or not, the most important thing was that they were together. The doctor, understanding her pain, emphasized that infertility was not a verdict, but that she needed to take care of her body, undergo additional tests, and have another examination to ensure that her health was in order. "There are various treatment methods," said Dr. Robert Pearson, "from intrauterine insemination to IVF. But it's important to remember that each method comes with its own risks and side effects. You need to discuss all the details with your husband and make a decision together." Kathy scheduled the additional examination, but her mind was still plagued with uncertainty about the future. She planned to talk to Sean about it, but for some reason, she kept postponing the conversation. And then everything changed drastically. Sean began staying late at work more often, stopped calling, and no longer shared his problems with her. Kathy felt him drifting away and tried to talk to him to find out what was going on. But Sean brushed her off, saying he was just busy with work. Kathy had no idea that, in reality, he had been seeing someone else for a long time. She found out from Jessica, her neighbor, who had seen Sean kissing another woman in the city park. Kathy was in shock. She couldn't believe that her beloved husband was cheating on her. When confronted, Sean admitted to it but showed no remorse. He even told her that their relationship had long since run its course, that they were too different, and that he had found someone else more suitable for a family, Helen Moore, a secretary from his office. A week ago, on her way home from work, Kathy saw a painfully familiar figure. Sean, with a wide smile on his face, was walking arm in arm with a woman. The plump Helen, with her voluminous red hair, was pregnant. Her rounded belly, outlined by a tight blouse, was unmistakable. Kathy froze in place, as if turned to stone. Her heart plummeted, dragging all her hopes and illusions into the abyss. The air around her seemed to thicken, muting all sounds except for the furious pounding of her own heart. "No, this can't be Sean. This isn't him," Kathy whispered, still unable to believe what she was seeing. She stood there, watching as her husband and Helen, like a pair of love-struck teenagers, tenderly embraced and then entered a cafe together. Paralyzed by shock, she couldn't move. How could this happen? Why is this happening to me? She thought, unable to find words to describe the storm of emotions raging within her soul. Finally shaking off her sad thoughts, Kathy made herself a cup of tea and settled down in the kitchen. On the edge of the table lay her talisman, a flower carved by a boy from her childhood, Douglas. "Where are you now, Douglas?" she wondered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a homeless man, the one who had indirectly caused her to lose her job, was slowly regaining consciousness in an intensive care unit. The world began to emerge from the fog, like the sun breaking through thick clouds. At first weak and barely noticeable, then growing brighter and brighter, enveloping his awareness in a dull, grayish light. The vagrant struggled to open his eyes, forcing his eyelids apart and trying to focus on his surroundings. White walls, a white bed, white sheets, everything around him was white, like in a hospital room, though the air had a strange, spicy scent, mixed with a faint smell of medicine and alcohol. He tried to turn his head, but a sharp pain shot through his body, making him groan. His head felt like it was splitting, and his stomach was filled with what seemed like molten lava. He tried to remember how he ended up in this place, but his mind was a void, filled only with the hoarse, hollow echo of his own groaning. Fragments of memory surfaced: a dark alley, two figures in hoods, a sharp pain, and then an icy cold. And then, nothing. He attempted to move, but a stabbing pain in his chest made him gasp for air, and his vision darkened. "Well, look at that, he's alive," came a voice from the far corner of the room. The orderlies were already placing bets on whether you'd pull through or not. The vagrant forced his eyes open with great effort. Standing over him was a tall man in a white coat, with a thin layer of gray stubble and stern gray eyes. "Who are you?" the patient rasped. "And where am I?" "This is a hospital, and I'm the head of the surgical department, Carl," the man replied, squinting slightly. "How are you feeling, patient?" "The surgery went as well as could be expected." "Surgery?" the patient echoed, suddenly recalling the darkness, the sharp blow to his stomach, and the searing pain. "What happened to me?" "You were stabbed," Carl said, coughing as he turned away slightly. "I don't know what you did, but it clearly didn't sit well with someone." "Who attacked me?" "Why?" the vagrant asked, attempting to sit up, but a sharp pain in his lower abdomen forced him to groan and sink back onto the pillow. "Did you get amnesia or something?" The head surgeon raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. "You were found in an alley with a stab wound. You had a penetrating injury near the pancreas and several superficial wounds." The vagrant stared silently at the doctor, struggling to grasp the medical terms and make sense of how this could have happened. That evening, he had simply been walking home after his shift as a market porter when suddenly. "And who beat you up like this?" the head surgeon smirked. "Maybe you got yourself into some kind of trouble, huh?" "I don't know." "You don't know?" Carl moved closer, leaning down toward the patient. "Well, we're going to help you remember." "Help me?" The vagrant looked at the doctor with growing anxiety, not understanding what he meant. "Yes, help," the head surgeon chuckled. "We have an excellent method." "What method?" the homeless man asked, his voice trembling with fear. "Don't worry, it's not as scary as it sounds." The surgeon patted him on the shoulder. The vagrant wanted to say something, but his throat was dry, and the words stuck. "By the way," Carl said as he stepped away from the bed, "I have some other news. The doctor who performed your surgery has been fired." "Fired? Why?" "Why don't you ask her yourself?" Carl smirked. "She'll tell you everything." The vagrant felt a deep sense of unease. Meanwhile, Carl smirked, turned his back on the patient, and headed toward the door, leaving the homeless man alone with the dull pain in his abdomen and head. He didn't understand what was happening, but he sensed that something truly terrifying was unfolding before him. Fragments of memories swirled in his mind, unable to piece together a coherent picture of his life. Faces, voices, and situations flashed by, all of which he couldn't explain. He felt like his life was a mosaic with several missing pieces. For a while, he lay there in silence, listening to the beating of his heart, the sound of his own breathing, feeling weak and defenseless. Eventually, he closed his eyes and drifted back to sleep, only to be plagued by nightmares where he was the prey and others were the hunters. He awoke a couple of hours later to bright lights and loud noises. The room was now filled with people, doctors in white coats, nurses with syringes, and some strange figures in business suits who seemed to have the authority to do almost anything. "So, how are you feeling, son?" asked one of the men in a suit as he approached the bed. "You must have remembered everything by now?" "Who are you?" the homeless man croaked. "And what do you mean, son?" "I'm Adam Hayes," the man in the suit replied. "And you're my son, Douglas." "Son?" The vagrant flinched. How is that possible? I recently discovered that I have an illegitimate son, and I've finally found you, Adam said, patting the man on the shoulder. There was a flicker of something genuinely human and familiar in his eyes. I've been searching for you for a long time, Douglas. The homeless man still couldn't believe what he was hearing. He, a homeless person who had been living on the streets, scraping by with odd jobs, was suddenly being told he was the son of a wealthy man. Adam, but how? The patient struggled to form the words. I never knew I had a father. It's no longer important, Douglas. Everyone has a father, after all. What matters is that we'll be together from now on, Adam smiled warmly. Douglas's mind was swirling with questions, but he couldn't voice them. He was still in shock. Allow me to introduce myself, said another man in a suit as he stepped closer to the bed. My name is Joe Sparks. I'm your father's personal lawyer. And I'm George Watson, added the third man, also in a suit. I'm a financial consultant. The vagrant stared at them as if they were some kind of strange, otherworldly beings. What's happening? He whispered, barely able to move on the bed. You've made a mistake. I'm just an ordinary homeless man. We know everything, Douglas, Adam replied calmly. And we haven't made any mistake. But how? Douglas closed his eyes. I have no family, no home, no money. Douglas, everything is going to change, his father promised. You're a part of our family now. Family? The only person I ever considered family was. Douglas trailed off. Elizabeth Howard, Adam said, a tear glistening in his eye. I know she was like a mother to you. Douglas flinched. He realized that this visitor knew about his life before he hit rock bottom. After a moment of thought, Adam took Douglas's hand in his own and squeezed it firmly. I won't abandon you. I'll protect you, no matter what. Adam then began to share the story of his love for Elizabeth, Douglas's mother. It was a love that sparked instantly between them at a college party. Elizabeth, with her bright eyes and a smile that could light up any room, and Adam, ambitious and determined to succeed, quickly realized they were destined to be together. But their love was strictly forbidden. Elizabeth came from a poor family, while Adam was born into wealth. Their parents were vehemently opposed to their union, but the young couple refused to be torn apart. Fearing their parents' wrath, they met in secret, at parks, movies, and dances. Their love was both beautiful and tragic. Soon, Elizabeth became pregnant. She was determined to keep the baby and refused to consider an abortion. But Adam was scared. He didn't want their relationship to become public, fearing his parents would find out about his love for a poor girl. It was Adam who convinced Elizabeth to leave town temporarily, promising that he would find her as soon as he had achieved independence and success. It was a risky plan, but when you're 25 and the whole world seems against you, you're willing to agree to just about anything. Elizabeth, in tears, moved to another city where she gave birth to a son, whom she named Douglas. For 5 years, she lived in poverty, supporting herself and the child with sporadic earnings. On long, cold evenings, Elizabeth dreamed of the life she could have had with Adam, but he never returned. And her fate as a lonely mother was cut short 3 days before Douglas's 6th birthday. She contracted pneumonia, sought help too late, and medicine was powerless. Adam initially tried to find her but, under persistent pressure from his parents, married a young widow of a millionaire instead, a woman with a 1-year-old child. Yet Elizabeth always remained in his heart, an indelible thread running through his life. Unable to hold back his emotions, Douglas closed his eyes, afraid he might cry in front of everyone. Rest easy, son. I'll come back tomorrow, and for now, I'll handle things with the chief, Adam whispered, signaling to his entourage. Douglas nodded weakly and fell into a sticky, anxious sleep. Morning dawned in the intensive care unit, light streaming through frosted windows and illuminating the white walls. Douglas, still weak from the effects of the medication, lay in bed, staring at the white ceiling tiles. His mind was tangled with hazy memories of the past, the unpleasant incident at the cafe entrance, and the pain in his abdomen. and the frightening surgery that had followed. After the morning rounds, Adam entered the room with a smile on his face. "How are you feeling?" "Okay, just my head is still spinning." "That's from the medication. It'll pass soon. I've brought someone to see you. She's the one who saved you." A young woman with striking blue eyes and short dark hair peeked into the room. She held some documents, and Douglas soon realized they were his medical records. "Hello. I'm Kathy, the surgeon. You might not remember me, but I'm the one who saved you." "No, I don't remember anything." "That's normal. Anesthesia can cause temporary memory loss," Kathy smiled, having been brought from her home by Adam Hayes' people that morning. "Kathy did an excellent job on you, son. She's a true professional. But Carl fired her out of fear that one day she might take his place. But that's fine. Now he can only work as a janitor here," Adam said, touching his son's hand and tactfully exiting the room. Douglas managed a weary smile. Kathy responded with a smile of her own, then moved closer and began examining the data on the monitors displaying his vital signs. Douglas couldn't help but admire her figure, and then a very unusual object fell from the doctor's pocket. "What is it?" "A metal figurine, a keychain, keys?" "No." "Oh my God, it's a flower cut from stainless steel." Tears welled up in Douglas's eyes. At that moment, he recognized the object because he had made it himself many years ago, giving it to a little girl at the cemetery. Could it really be the same Kathy? No, it can't be. He still couldn't believe that the doctor was the same little girl he had met years ago. The one who, holding the small metal flower, had shared her dream of becoming a doctor. And the one whose sadness and strength of spirit had touched him deeply, remaining in his heart forever. Douglas was overwhelmed with conflicting emotions, joy at the unexpected reunion, fear that it might all be an illusion, and sadness from memories of how, as a young boy, he lost her during a game of hide and seek. "Kathy," he said softly. His voice trembled. "Is it really you, the girl from the cemetery?" She suddenly looked up, a tear glistening in her eye. You remember me?" Her voice was tentative, as if she herself couldn't believe what was happening. "How could I forget?" A bittersweet smile appeared on Douglas's face, more sorrowful than joyful. "You were so small, but I never forgot your words and your dreams." Kathy looked at him silently, her eyes growing more and more moist. Her little world, which she had built for herself in the hospital, had collapsed in an instant. There was no room for memories, for the past. "I was only 10, she whispered softly. "And you?" 11, Douglas continued. "I shouldn't have left then." "I'm sorry." Kathy averted her gaze and began breathing rapidly, unable to comprehend what she was feeling, joy at the reunion or fear that their meeting might just become another painful chapter in her life. "I waited for you so long," Douglas whispered, his voice carrying both pain and joy. "And I waited for you," Kathy whispered back. In that moment, they embraced, or rather, Kathy was the one doing the embracing, while Douglas savored the moment and thanked the heavens for the help. Their embrace was warm, tender, filled with hope. At that moment, Adam entered the room. His hands were shoved into his jacket pockets, and a broad smile played on his face. "How's everything going, kids?" he asked, approaching his son's bed. "All good, Dad," Douglas replied, his eyes still on Kathy. "That's great," Adam smiled. "By the way, I found out who attacked you in the alley. The head of security figured it out. It was Chester, my stepson from my second marriage. He's always been bitter, greedy, and envious. He didn't want to share my fortune with you, so he orchestrated the attack. He wanted to claim the estate for himself, and you were in his way." Adam fell silent, his eyes filling with tears. "Dad." Douglas gently placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Everything will be all right. We're together now." "Yes, son. We are family." Adam looked at him with hope and love. Kathy stood by the bed, her eyes a mixture of joy, sadness, hope, and perhaps love. She didn't know what the future held, but she was certain of one thing: she would remain with Douglas. The following weeks flew by. Douglas was recovering quickly from the surgery, attending rehabilitation, doing physical exercises, and taking his prescribed medications. He was fully immersed in his recovery process. Kathy, meanwhile, continued working at the hospital. She was a confident and competent surgeon who was being considered for the vacant position of head of the department. Patients loved her for her care, patience, and kindness. Kathy truly was a wonderful person. Every morning, Douglas woke up to her tender kisses. She was always by his side, supporting and caring for him, and in the evenings, the young couple would have dinner together and watch a movie. Their life was filled with happiness and love. Their wedding was modest, attended only by the closest family and friends. Adam looked tired but happy. He was glad his son had found happiness with such a wonderful woman. Kathy wore a beautiful dress, and her eyes sparkled with joy. Douglas was worried he might not be able to stand during the ceremony, but the love and support he received gave him strength. When the official ceremony was over, Douglas leaned down to kiss his wife. She closed her eyes, and in that kiss was all their love. After the ceremony, at a modest restaurant, Douglas and Kathy danced to soft music and enjoyed each other's company. And how else could they celebrate when the pregnancy test showed those precious 2 lines? If you enjoyed the story, please support it with a like and a comment. All the best.